Imagine for a moment that death wasn't an end, but merely a change of state. How would you face grief if you were certain that the one you love hadn't vanished, but had simply walked through an invisible door? This question might seem uncomfortable, but it's precisely what forces us to reflect more deeply on what life truly is and what death is. When we lose someone, we feel as though the world has been ripped from beneath our feet. The silence of absence is deafening, and often we ask ourselves, where are they now? Are they okay? Can they still hear me? These concerns are not minor, and it is here that spiritualism, combined with the insights of Edgar Cayce, opens a new window of understanding. Spiritualism invites us to look beyond immediate pain. It doesn't promise that suffering will disappear as if by magic, but it shows that grief can be experienced in a different way, less desperate and more conscious. To understand this, we must first recognize a simple yet transformative truth. Life doesn't begin in the cradle and doesn't end in the tomb. Life is a continuous flow of learning and experiences. Cayce, known as the sleeping prophet, stated in his readings that the soul is eternal and that death does not erase individuality. In other words, the one who departed continues to exist in another dimension, at another frequency, still accessible to our hearts and prayers. But before accepting this idea, it's natural for the mind to question. The suffering heart asks, if they still exist, why can't I hug them now? Why does the emptiness feel so real? And this is where we find one of the greatest difficulties of grief, the discrepancy between what faith teaches us and what our immediate senses show us. Spiritualism does not ignore this pain. It does not diminish suffering. On the contrary, it recognizes that grief is a legitimate passage for the incarnated soul, a process of emotional readjustment. It's as if we are invited to learn to communicate in another way, to maintain a bond that is no longer expressed by touch, but by inner attunement. Cayce said that the soul remains conscious after death, and that love creates bonds that neither time nor distance can break. This idea connects deeply with the spiritualist teaching that the disembodied remain close to us, often trying to comfort us. If the heart is broken by absence, this reflection offers a possibility of relief. Our love does not fall into emptiness. Every prayer, every sincere thought reaches the one who departed. This perception does not eliminate pain, but it gives a different meaning to suffering, transforming grief into a process of inner reunion. It's important to emphasize that spiritualism doesn't ask us to stifle our tears. Crying is part of the human process, but it warns us about the risk of drowning in despair, because excessive suffering can disturb the one who has moved on. Edgar Cayce reinforced the same notion. Our emotions and thoughts reverberate on subtle planes, and the connection we maintain with those who have departed should be a bridge of serenity, not torment. Think of it as a phone call. If on one side there is only crying and despair, communication gets muddled. But if there is calm, trust, and love, the connection becomes clear. Many who go through grief carry guilt. They ask themselves, could I have done more? Was I enough? Cayce and spiritualism remind us that life is a school, and each relationship is a chapter that serves a purpose. No one leaves before their time. Every departure, however painful it may seem, is part of a larger plan, invisible to our immediate eyes. Recognizing this does not negate suffering, but it helps alleviate the weight of guilt. Grief becomes not only a period of absence, but also an opportunity for reflection on what it truly means to love. Love, according to this view, is eternal. It is not limited to the circumstances of a single existence. Spiritualism tells us about reincarnation, the possibility of future reunions in other bodies in other times. Cayce also confirmed that souls meet repeatedly, going through different shared learning experiences. When this idea penetrates us, we realize that death is not a definitive goodbye, but merely a see you soon on a much broader journey. This certainty may not erase longing, but it transforms grief into an active weight, a trust that true bonds are never broken. But perhaps you are wondering, how do I apply this in daily life when the emptiness squeezes my chest and memories bring tears to my eyes? This is where theory meets practice. Cayce suggested exercises in prayer, meditation, and especially service to others as ways to alleviate the pain of absence. Spiritualism also points in the same direction. When we are suffering, one of the most effective ways to find comfort is to extend a hand. Helping someone, listening to a person, offering a gesture of kindness. This movement opens space within us and allows the energy of love, which seemed blocked by longing, to flow again. Imagine the following scene. You are suffering from the loss of someone, and in the midst of pain you decide to write a letter to that person. Not a farewell letter, but a letter of continuity. In it, you talk about what you learned together, thank them for the moments, and promise to move forward with courage. This simple practice, recommended in both modern therapies and spiritual traditions, helps reorganize the bond. It's as if you are telling the other soul, I miss you, but I'm moving forward. Our love hasn't ended. This attitude not only alleviates longing, but also strengthens the conviction that the bond remains alive. At this point, perhaps you realize that grief is a demanding teacher, but it is also a profound one. It forces us to confront the fragility of life and, at the same time, to discover strengths we didn't know we possessed. Cayce said that every painful experience is also an opportunity for spiritual growth. Spiritualism confirms losses teach us to detach, to understand that nothing is truly ours in a material sense. What we take with us, what remains beyond death, is only the love we were able to give and receive. Therefore, when we think about how to deal with grief, it's not about finding a magic formula to eliminate pain. It's about transforming that pain into consciousness. Spiritualism and Cayce invite us to take a step further, to accept that life is much bigger than we can see, that those we love are still alive in another dimension, and that the true challenge is not to forget, but to learn to love in a new way. When we talk about grief, we often think only of the pain of loss, that emptiness that opens in the heart and seems to never close. But there is a silent, almost invisible aspect that accompanies grief and that few perceive, the transformation it causes in us. Spiritualism, as well as Edgar Cayce's reflections, show us that grief is not just a period of pain, but also a process of renewal. It's as if life forces us to shed our skin, to abandon old certainties, and to seek new meanings. This process can be painful, but it can also become deeply liberating if understood in the light of spirituality. Many who face grief describe the feeling of being in a parallel world, where everything seems to continue normally for others. But for those who suffer, time takes on a different texture. Days become longer, memories become more intense, and small details that once went unnoticed now seem loaded with meaning. It is in this state that we begin to ask ourselves, what is the meaning of all this? Why did we have to go through this pain? And it is precisely these questions that open the door to spirituality. Cayce said that the greatest transformations of the soul do not happen in moments of comfort, but in periods of crisis. Grief then would not be just a punishment or a fatality, but a call to reflection, a push to see beyond the surface. Spiritualism teaches us that disembodiment is not an absolute rupture, but a passage. This understanding, however, does not eliminate the pain of absence. What it does is offer a new perspective. Instead of just feeling that someone has been torn from us, we can begin to perceive that this person remains alive in another dimension, and that in some way the relationship continues, albeit in another format. Think, for example, of a friendship that becomes long distance. You no longer meet the person every day, but you still exchange messages, still cherish memories, still feel their presence in your life. With grief, something similar happens, only on a more subtle level. The bond remains, but it needs to be rediscovered. Cayce emphasized that the bonds of love do not dissolve with death. On the contrary, they become even deeper, because now they do not depend on physical limitations. He affirmed that spirits remain conscious and often close to us, especially in moments when we miss them most. This idea is also supported by spiritualism, which recounts countless cases in which spirits communicate with the embodied, bringing messages of hope and affection. What this shows us is that when we connect mentally with our loved ones, we are not speaking to emptiness. We are, in fact, creating a bridge of energy and love that crosses the barrier of matter. But here it is important to understand a delicate nuance. When we plunge into despair, this connection can become a burden for the one who has departed. The spirit, on its new journey, can feel the intensity of the suffering and become trapped by that pain instead of moving on peacefully. This is why spiritualism recommends that we cultivate thoughts of serenity, even when tears insist on falling. It is not about repressing pain, but about transforming it into prayer, into gratitude, into memories that uplift rather than bind. Cayce also advised the same, to send thoughts of light and prayers, because the energy of love arrives as a balm on the other side. This leads us to another essential point, the power of prayer. Often, in the midst of grief, we feel we have no strength for anything. But prayer, however simple, however just a phrase murmured with sincerity, creates a current of connection and relief. When we pray, we are not just asking, but also attuning ourselves to a higher frequency, capable of calming the mind and quieting the heart. Cayce said that prayer is like a wave that overcomes all barriers. Spiritualism also reinforces this practice, showing that through it, we can help not only ourselves but also the departed spirit. Another important aspect we need to address is guilt. It almost always appears in the grieving process. I could have done more, I should have said that. If I had acted differently, perhaps the outcome would have been different. These thoughts corrode and often hinder the healing process. But both spiritualism and Cayce teach us that life is not governed by chance. There is a law of cause and effect, a greater order that organizes events. This means that no one leaves before their time, and that each relationship fulfills a necessary cycle for the learning of all involved. Guilt, in this sense, is an illusion created by our mind to try to control the uncontrollable. The best way to honor those who have departed is not to torture ourselves with what could have been, but to live more consciously and lovingly from now on. Cayce spoke a lot about the purpose of life. For him, each existence is an opportunity for growth, and each challenge, however painful it may seem, carries a lesson within it. Grief, however paradoxical it may sound, can teach us to value life more deeply. It shows us the fragility of time, the importance of saying I love you while it's possible, of living the present with more authenticity. Spiritualism adds to this teaching the certainty of the continuity of life, reminding us that every act of love is never lost, but is carried forward by the soul. In this way, instead of being stuck on what we didn't do, we can choose to live the present as a legacy for those who have departed, transforming pain into action. And perhaps herein lies one of the greatest keys to dealing with grief, transforming longing into movement. Many people find solace when they decide to honor the memory of their loved one through concrete gestures, whether by helping other people, cultivating qualities that person admired, or simply living with more generosity. Cayce recommended that, in moments of pain, the best remedy was to serve. Spiritualism also shows that when we open ourselves to others, the energy of love that seemed trapped by pain begins to flow again. And this movement not only helps us, but also illuminates the path of the one who has already moved on. Of course, none of this means that grief will be easy. There is no magic, no shortcut. What exists is a process of maturation that each one goes through in their own time. Some take months, others years. Spiritualism and Cayce do not promise to eliminate pain, but they offer a map so that we can navigate it with more awareness. This map shows that death is not an end, that life continues, that love remains, and that every tear can be transformed into learning. And here I propose a direct reflection to you. If you knew that your loved one could feel and perceive your vibration, what kind of energy would you like to transmit to them now? Anxiety and despair, or serenity and love? This choice is personal, and no one can be perfect every day. But every effort in this direction creates a real difference. This is one of the most powerful ways to transform grief into a path of spiritual growth. There comes a moment in grief when pain begins to transform into silence. It's no longer that constant crying, nor the suffocating feeling of the first few days, but an emptiness that settles in more subtly. Many people describe this phase as a kind of emotional anesthesia, where life continues but seems colorless. It is at this point that spirituality becomes even more necessary, because it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that nothing will make sense anymore. Spiritualism, allied with the reflections of Edgar Cayce, invites us precisely to see this silence not as an end, but as a space for reconstruction, a pause for the soul to reorganize its strengths. Cayce said that every emotional crisis is like a dark night of the soul, and that this darkness should not be feared because it prepares the ground for a new dawn. Spiritualism also reinforces this idea, showing that spiritual life is not a linear path of constant joy, but a journey made of highs and lows, each bringing its lessons. In the case of grief, this silent emptiness can be understood as an opportunity for resignification. What seemed like mere absence slowly begins to reveal itself as an invitation to look within, to discover new meanings of living and loving. It is during this period that many people feel the spiritual presence of their loved one more strongly, not in extraordinary manifestations or supernatural phenomena, but in subtle signs, a dream that feels too real, a memory that arises in a moment of need, an inexplicable feeling of companionship amidst loneliness. Spiritualism teaches us that these signs are not products of imagination, but expressions of an active spiritual reality. Cayce also said that the world of spirits is closer than we think, and that communication, though not always conscious, happens naturally when love is true. But here an important question arises: how to distinguish real comfort from an illusion created by the desire for reunion? Spiritualism guides that the main criterion is serenity. If the sign, dream, or memory brings peace and strengthens you, it is likely a genuine communication. If, on the contrary, it generates anguish or increases despair, it may just be a reflection of a suffering mind. Cayce agreed, stating that true spiritual communication never comes to cause fear, but to guide, comfort, and encourage evolution. This teaches us that we should not be obsessed with seeking proofs of the soul's survival, but rather learn to recognize the silent calm that the bonds of love continue to offer us. It is also at this stage of grief that the need to rebuild routine arises. Practical life, which often lay paralyzed in the first days of pain, now begins to demand movement, returning to work, caring for the family, assuming responsibilities. For many, this can seem almost like a betrayal of the loved one's memory. How can I continue living normally if they are no longer here? Spiritualism brings a clear and comforting answer. Continuing to live is a way to honor the life of the one who departed. Cayce reinforced that the greatest gift we can offer to those we love is to continue learning, because the evolution of our soul also reverberates in their progress. It is at this point that one of the most transformative practices comes into play: the cultivation of gratitude. Gratitude not for the suffering, but for the opportunity to have lived with that person, for the shared love, for the moments that can never be erased. Gratitude changes the soul's vibration. It does not eliminate longing, but it makes it lighter, because instead of focusing only on what was lost, we begin to recognize the value of what was lived. Cayce said that gratitude is one of the most powerful spiritual forces, capable of opening channels of light between the planes. Spiritualism confirms that when we cultivate thoughts of gratitude, we are sending positive energy to the spirit of our loved one, helping them on their journey and strengthening our own heart as well. In this process, it is common for people to start reflecting more on their own lives. What if it were me instead of him? What would I have failed to do? What truly matters to me? These questions may seem daunting, but they are in fact signs of maturation. Grief puts us face to face with the reality that time is limited and that earthly life is just a passage. Spiritualism reminds us that we are here to learn, to evolve, and that every daily choice contributes to the destiny of our soul. Cayce added that the awareness of death should inspire us to live with more purpose instead of paralyzing us with fear. There is also a social and community aspect that cannot be ignored. Many people during grief feel misunderstood by others. Comments like "you need to be strong" or "life goes on" can sound insensitive and increase the feeling of isolation. Spiritualism offers an alternative by proposing that spiritual centers and study groups be welcoming spaces where pain is understood and respected, but also illuminated by the hope of future life. Cayce also suggested that community support is essential because suffering becomes lighter when shared. The central message here is: No one has to go through grief alone. And if we pause to think, this support network is an extension of the very love that connects us to the spiritual world. Just as our departed loved ones continue to accompany us, we also find in those who remain embodied an opportunity for support and learning. Pain, when shared with empathy, transforms into a bridge of solidarity. And this movement benefits not only those who receive, but also those who offer, because every act of care is a way to strengthen one's own soul. Another essential point is the relationship between grief and faith. For some people, loss deeply shakes their trust in God. Questions arise such as, why did He allow this? What justice is there in taking someone so loved? Spiritualism does not offer simplistic answers, but points to a greater logic, in which each spirit has its own trajectory, regardless of what we can understand now. Cayce also acknowledged these doubts, but said that faith is not the absence of questions, but the trust that there is meaning, even when we don't see it clearly. This trust is not born of an imposition, but of lived experiences, perceived signs, and an intuition that strengthens little by little. It is in this maturation that grief can transform into a new form of spirituality. Many report that, after the loss, they began to dedicate themselves more to prayer, study, and charity, not as an escape, but as a way to keep the bond with their loved one alive. This practice transforms grief into a path of growth. What seemed like mere pain becomes motivation to be better, to value what truly matters more intensely. Cayce said that death can be seen as a spiritual alarm clock, a call for us to awaken from the slumber of routine and begin to live with more consciousness. And perhaps herein lies the greatest revelation. Grief, when illuminated by spirituality, ceases to be merely absence and also becomes presence. Not a physical presence, but a broader presence that accompanies us invisibly and constantly. The loved one has not disappeared. They have merely changed planes, and the relationship has not been destroyed, merely transformed. With each prayer, each gesture of love, each step of evolution, we feel that this bond remains active, alive, pulsating. Therefore, instead of seeing grief as just an enemy, we can begin to see it as a rigorous but generous teacher. It shows us the pain of separation, but also reveals the greatness of spiritual life. It confronts us with fragility, but also awakens a strength we didn't know we possessed. And if we choose to walk this path with faith, with serenity, and with love, we will discover that behind the tears there is a greater truth. Death is not the end, and love is forever. As we reach the end of this journey through grief, it's natural for a question to echo in our hearts. How do we move forward without feeling like we're abandoning the one who departed? This is perhaps the most intimate doubt for those suffering the absence of a loved one. Many believe that moving forward means forgetting, leaving behind. But spiritualism and Edgar Cayce help us see that, in reality, moving forward is a way to continue loving in a more mature and conscious manner. Life doesn't demand that we stop loving those who are gone. It merely invites us to transform that love into something that transcends longing and becomes strength for the journey. Spiritualism teaches us that life is a succession of encounters and reunions. Death doesn't end a story. It merely closes a chapter so that another can begin. Cayce reinforced that true bonds extend through various incarnations and that no separation is definitive. When we assimilate this view, we understand that honoring the memory of the departed is not to bear the weight of pain eternally, but to live in a way that makes this love worth even more. Every gesture of kindness, every conscious choice, every act of evolution becomes a silent yet powerful tribute to those we love. That's why both Cayce and spiritualism insist on an essential point. Grief needs to transform into action. Longing, when kept only within us, can become a burden. But when we direct it outward, it converts into movement, into creative energy. How many people have founded charities, written books, helped entire communities motivated by the desire to honor someone who passed away? How many have transformed their pain into inspiration so that others wouldn't suffer the same? This is one of the most beautiful ways to understand grief, as an engine that pushes us to do more, to love more, to live more intensely. Cayce affirmed that every incarnated spirit has a mission, and that experiences, including losses, are part of that greater purpose. Spiritualism confirms that no one goes through pain in vain. If you are experiencing grief, it is because there is a capacity for growth within your soul that can blossom from this experience. It's not about glorifying suffering, but about recognizing that it can open doors that joy would never open. Grief teaches us in a harsh way that time is precious, that life is fragile, and that love is the only thing we truly take with us. But a delicate question remains: how to deal with the longing that insists on returning, even after years? The answer may lie in changing how we perceive this longing. Instead of treating it as an enemy, we can see it as a reminder of how much we were capable of loving. Longing is proof that the shared life was true, meaningful, transformative. Cayce said that every emotion, when well directed, can become spiritual strength. Spiritualism guides us to channel longing into prayer, into thoughts of light, into memories that bring peace. Thus, longing ceases to be merely pain and becomes a bond, an invisible thread that connects us to the one who departed. And if we look even more deeply, we realize that grief also prepares us for our own departure one day. It may sound uncomfortable to think about, but the truth is that all of us, at some point, will cross that same door. Spiritualism invites us to face death not as a tragedy, but as a natural transition. Cayce described the experience of death as an awakening to a broader reality, where the soul recognizes itself as eternal. When we understand this, fear diminishes, and life gains another flavor. We begin to value the now more, to invest more in bonds of love, to live with more authenticity, knowing that each choice shapes not only this moment, but also our spiritual future. This understanding also changes how we view reunions. Spiritualism teaches us that, after death, there is a real possibility of seeing those we love again, whether on the spiritual plane or in future incarnations. Cayce confirmed that souls meet repeatedly in different roles and circumstances, but always guided by the invisible thread of love. This certainty transforms the idea of loss. Grief ceases to be a definitive farewell and becomes a pause, a confident wait for the inevitable reunion. This hope does not eliminate pain, but it softens it, because it places suffering in a larger perspective that goes beyond a single existence. But perhaps you are thinking, all this is beautiful, but in everyday life the pain is still real. What to do when longing grips you in the middle of the night, when your heart fills with emptiness? It is in these moments that simple practices become fundamental. Prayer, uplifting reading, meditation, small acts of charity. Cayce said that when we connect with good, our mind opens to receive positive spiritual influence. Spiritualism reinforces that, in these hours, sincere prayer is like an immediate balm that not only calms our soul but also reaches the one who departed. These practices are not magical solutions, but concrete tools that help us get through the most difficult moments with more serenity. Another essential point is the acceptance of one's own timeline. Grief has no expiration date, and each person experiences it in a unique way. Some recover faster, others carry the pain for many years. There is no right or wrong. Spiritualism and Cayce remind us that each soul has its rhythm, and that respecting this rhythm is part of learning. The important thing is not to cling to despair, not to transform pain into a prison. Even when longing remains, it is possible to live with lightness, as long as we accept that grief is a journey and not an eternal sentence. And if there is one final lesson that spiritualism and Cayce leave us, it is that love never dies. It can change form, it can express itself in different ways, but it never disappears. It is love that unites us in this life. It is love that accompanies us after death, and it is love that guarantees our reunion in the future. Therefore, perhaps the best way to deal with grief is to cultivate this love consciously, transforming it into actions, thoughts, daily choices that reflect the greatness of the bond that unites us to the one who departed. Now, if you've made it this far, it's because this topic has deeply touched you. Perhaps you are experiencing grief, perhaps you know someone who is, or perhaps you simply want to better understand life and death. Whatever the reason, know that you are not alone. Spiritualism and Cayce show us that there is always an invisible network of support formed by spirits, by embodied friends, by people who share the same pain and the same hope. This network is around you, even when you don't perceive it. And the simple fact of seeking this knowledge is already a way of connecting to this energy of light. Therefore, if this content brought you clarity, hope, or comfort, allow it to reach others as well. Share this video, like it, and subscribe to the channel. In doing so, you not only strengthen your own journey, but also help bring this message to whoever might be needing it right now. After all, when we transform grief into learning and shared love, we take an immense step towards true life, the one that never ends.